started this project about a month or so ago and finished it up. I wanted to put together a full video from start to finish. Now the camera that I'm recording with now is an iPhone 8. It only has so much storage and I can only put up a small amount of video before the storage capacity is taken up. We wanted to start out by removing all the old trim. Some of this old trim's hard to come by and irreplaceable. Now we had done another room. There's a video I put up of another room that we did, and we had started stripping the trim, and the owner was thinking about replacing the trim. I convinced him to keep it because this old trim looks great when it's all finished. And the newer trim just doesn't have the nostalgic look as this older trim does. It's hard to come by and very expensive if you have to try to replace it. You have to get it custom made, and there's very few places that'll make it for you. Now at first the owner was thinking maybe we could patch up the old plaster wall and fill in the cracks. I convinced him maybe we should just put up new drywall and give it all a fresh look. Most of the time when you try to patch up that old plaster, it usually ends up cracking later down the road, and you got a mess you got to go back and keep continuing fixing and repairing. Before we put up the drywall, I marked all the studs on the wall to make a point of reference where to put the screws. Now these original walls in these old houses most normally have lath with plaster over the top of it. In this case it was the same. You're going to have pretty good luck hitting something even if you're not hitting the stud. In this particular room from the floor to ceiling was close to 9 feet. So we put the smaller piece on the bottom to keep it out of the line of sight. Now somebody had done the ceiling a couple years back, so we decided it looked good enough to leave it like it was. Now I like to use a mesh tape. The paper tape, I seem to have trouble with it bubbling up after you put a couple applications of mud. Now this is the first coat of mud that I'm applying. Usually I don't waste no time sanding the first coat. I'll just scrape it down with the putty knife and knock some of the high spots down, then start applying the second coat. It's not really necessary to sand the first coat. You got to put more on anyway. Most generally I put 3 coats and fan it out to about 16 or 18 inches. And I'll do a little light sanding after the second coat, and the third coat I'll finish off sanding and do the final touch-ups. Now this is an older home, it's an old 2-story farmhouse. It probably was built in the 1920s or 1930s. I love restoring these old houses and bringing them back to the original form. It's pretty self-satisfying to see the job when it's complete on these old farmhouses. The owners are usually pretty happy about the progress and the finished product. On this part of the video, I'm sanding down the second coat. I use a sanding sponge. It works the best for me. I've tried sandpaper and other types of applications of sanding. Some of the paper just gums up. Sanding sponge has a nice square edge and it's easy to get in the corners, and it doesn't take too much off. It doesn't scratch the mud up that bad. Now the drywall jobs besides this, they're not hard to find. Nobody really wants to do this kind of work because they don't like the sand and all the dust. And I've tried many different ways. There's not no way to get around that dust. It just gets all over everything. You just have to sweep up after every time you sand and try to keep it as clean as you can until you get ready to paint. Now in this part of the video, I'm putting on the final coat. I like to try to fan it out. Each time I apply the mud, I put it a little bit wider and wider. I use a wider knife. I like it about 16 or 18 inches wide, so when you sand it down, you don't see any imperfections or lumps in the wall. Sometimes if you don't put enough mud, when the light hits the wall just right, you can see the imperfections after the paint job. And most of these jobs like this, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to try to get it as good as you can to please the customer. On this part of the video, I'm doing the final sanding to get it prepped for priming. Now there is some touch up occasionally here and there. The wall might get scratched, and there might be a little air bubble in the mud that you had to fill in. Now this part of the video, I started putting the primer on. I always try to tell the people I work for, try to get the paint rollers with a thicker nap, like 1/2 inch or 5/8. Them cheap thin nap rollers just don't cover, and you spend so much time rolling and rolling. And in the end, I think you end up taking more time and costing more money and wasting more paint. You don't want to get the cheap rollers. The thicker ones are way better by my experience. I like to use a 1.5 or 2 inch angle brush to get in the corners and close to the ceiling so you don't get paint over paint. More so when you're doing the finish coat on the walls to the ceiling, so you don't end up getting the paint on top of the ceiling and the ceiling paint on the walls. It goes back and forth. If you get a nice angle brush, it makes it a lot easier. Now in this particular case in this room, we only had to put 1 coat of primer. There have been times where I've had to put 2 or 3 coats, depending on what color the walls are. We did put 2 coats on the ceiling because that gray color was kind of bleeding through. On this part, I'm starting to put the first coat of paint on. I chose a gray to make it neutral. It's not too bright and overwhelming. It pretty much matches with anything. If you want a little contrast, you could put something up on the wall. You can put some pictures up that are bright in colors, or a clock. It's not going to be overwhelming with bright colors. If you put a few things on the wall to draw your eye away from the neutral color. Now this particular paint was a little bit expensive, but it covered real nice. Now on this day I was prepping some of the trim and getting it cleaned up. Some of it I had to strip all the way down because the paint was too chipped. I had painted over stain and it was bubbling up. Some of the pieces weren't too bad. I could just sand them down and reprime them. But there was a few of them, the head pieces mostly, I had to strip them all the way down. There was just too many profiles to try to prime over everything, and individual pieces that the paint got into cracks. The biggest part is somebody painted over stain and they didn't use the proper type of paint. Now this kind of work, you gotta keep going slow and steady at it. Like I said earlier in the video, the owner had helped me try to strip some of them, and he was getting frustrated. He just wanted to go buy new. But I talked him into keeping this old woodwork, because when it's all done, it wouldn't look the same without this old woodwork. By the time you get it all finished up, sure it takes a little extra time, but at the cost of new woodwork, you're going to have about the same amount of price compared to the labor with the old. The newer stuff is not going to look as good as this old woodwork. We probably ended up with about 20 hours labor on cleaning this old woodwork up, but we had priced out some new stuff, and a quarter round is about $1 a foot just for quarter round, and that ain't a very big piece of trim. Now, I had worked at a wood shop years ago, and we'd make custom moldings like this. Any board that's about 6, 8, or 10 inches wide, you're going to end up paying close to $10 a board foot to have it custom made. Then you got to figure in the trim for the doors and the windows. That's a little different, so they're going to have to order special knives to cut all that stuff. By the time you get it all said and done, it's going to cost you a heck of a lot more to have it custom made than you just refinished it like I'm doing here. Now the finished coat, they didn't want it too shiny, so we used a semi-gloss on it. I ended up putting a couple coats of primer, and I ended up putting 3 coats of paint to finish it. We did manage to salvage all the trim out of this room. There was a few pieces that were cracked. I used wood glue to glue them back together. I had a little wood putty in a couple spots to fill nail holes in. We done pretty good when we took it off. We didn't destroy anything. A couple pieces got cracked, but we managed to repair those and get them painted, and they look great. Now here I'm sanding the hardwood floor. They could have got one of the machines, but the way they laid the floor in such a pattern that unless you had an orbital machine, it's just going to scratch it because the patterns of the flooring goes in different directions. Somebody spent a lot of time when they put this floor down. When you get a closer look at it, you'll see what I'm talking about there. It goes in different directions, so there's no way you could use a belt sander. When you get past a certain point, it's just going to scratch the grain on the wood. Here I just used an orbital sander. I started out with 40 grit and sanded the whole thing down, then moved up to 60, then to 100. Now here I'm putting extensions on the door frames and the window frames, because after you put the drywall up, it's extended out a half inch past the original framing. I'm starting to put the casings on, the doors and the windows. I put those on first. When you put the baseboard on, you're going to have to cut it to adjust to the length of the thickness of the drywall. Everything is going to be an inch shorter because we put drywall up, so all the baseboard's going to have to be cut. So I like to put the doors and the windows on first, then go from there. Now in the videos, I got a lot of comments about these 3 windows in this bay area. It ended up turning out really nice. It's got this little bench underneath that I had to paint that and get that ready too. Now I'm moving along to caulking all the seams and all the joints and all the woodwork. Gives it a lot cleaner look when you fill all the holes in. Caulk all the cracks in the window trim and the baseboard. When you get into this point, the details is what matter. I always check back through and see if I missed any nail holes or any spots in the caulk might have shrinked up. All the details in the end really make a big difference in the end results. Here I'm finished up putting some trim along the ceiling. The owner didn't want to overdo it with some big gaudy looking crown molding. It wouldn't have matched the rest of the house. Originally it had a small piece of molding like this up on the ceilings. Here I'm putting on the sash stop on this bay window area, doing the caulking and the touch up to complete this area of the room. Now last year we put all these replacement windows in. The original windows were the old type that had the window weights and pulleys in them. We took all them out, had to pre-order the windows ahead of time to replace all the windows. These old houses like this, there's variable sizes. So we ordered them all ahead and then we put those in last year. Now here I'm starting on the clear coat on the floor. I'm putting the first coat on. It took about 2 hours for it to dry. It's a water-based clear coat. I'm using a roller on it. It works pretty nice. I used a brush on the edges and I rolled out the middle. Now before this application of clear coat, I got this stuff called tack cloth to help pick up any little fine lint or hairs or dust off the floor. So you know if you have animals or pets, sometimes hair will get in there, and once it's sealed in there, you ain't gonna get it out of there. You're gonna have to resand it. So that really helped with that. Use a tack cloth between coats. And in between coats, I had this bathroom door. I had to finish it up. It had a lot of bubbled areas on that edge there. You can see me stripping it all off there. The rest of it didn't look too bad. It was the same deal as the trim. Someone had used some type of paint over stain. That doesn't hold too good unless you got the right kind of paint. I went ahead and cleaned up the hinges and the hardware and put a coat of paint on them. It's all original and it made it look a lot nicer. Here I'm basically repeating the steps, putting on a third coat. I ended up with put 4 coats of clear coat on it to give a little thickness to it. You don't just want to put 1 or 2, then you go move your furniture around and it's probably going to scratch it. I'd recommend 3 or 4 coats at least. Each coat you put on, it gets a little more gloss to it. The first couple coats don't look too glossy, but after you put on 3 or 4 coats, it starts to shine up real nice. This particular room's a little bit over 10 feet by 10 feet. It only took about 20 minutes to put 1 coat of clear on. I was kind of surprised it didn't really take that long. Here I'm putting the 4th and final coat of clear on. I use tack cloth in between coats, make sure I got any dust particles or any debris off the floor, so it ends up giving it a nice finish. Now you can see in this shot, it's starting to get quite a bit more gloss. The more coats you apply, it's going to be a little bit glossier, depending on the type of clear coat. Some of it you can get satin, it's not as shiny. Depends on your preference, if you would like it real shiny or if you just wanted to have a satin finish. Now here I'm doing the final step. I put a quarter round on the bottom of all the baseboard. After we get this done and complete the job, there might be a couple of little spots to touch up. I finished the registers and painted them up. I want to thank everyone that watches, supports the channel. Appreciate all your views and your comments. And I'll let you enjoy the rest of the video and I'll see you in the next one.